I spent 12 years building this empire. 12 years of sleepless nights, 80-hour work weeks, sacrificing birthdays, relationships, vacations, everything. I poured my soul into this company, transforming it from a struggling operation on the verge of collapse into a $75 million industry leader. And yet, sitting at that family dinner, I realized none of it mattered. Because across the table, my father smiled. A warm, proud smile. The same one he used to give me when I won awards as a kid, when I made him proud. Except this time, it wasn't directed at me. His hand rested on my brother Adam's shoulder, his voice calm, final. Your brother will take over now. The world didn't slow down. There was no dramatic gasp, no clatter of silverware. The room kept moving, conversations hummed, glasses clinked together in celebratory toasts. But inside, something in me shattered. I forced myself to swallow, to keep my face composed. Years of learning how to control my emotions in boardrooms and high-stakes negotiations had prepared me for this moment. So, I smiled back, as if my father's words hadn't just erased 12 years of my life in an instant. Adam sat there, feigning humility, bowing his head slightly as relatives murmured their congratulations. But I saw it, the tiny twitch at the corner of his lips, the satisfied gleam in his eyes. He knew. He had known before I did. I tightened my grip around my wine glass, forcing my fingers to relax before anyone noticed the tension. My father didn't say anything more. He didn't have to. In his mind, the decision was made, the only decision that made sense. A son should inherit the empire. A daughter? No matter how much she built, no matter how many millions she made, she was just a placeholder. Across the table, my mother watched me carefully. She understood. She always had. But she wouldn't speak up. She never did. I excused myself before dessert. I needed air, needed space to breathe. Outside, the cold air bit at my skin, but it didn't clear my mind. My heart was pounding, my body vibrating with a mixture of betrayal and something else. Something I hadn't felt in years. Rage, not the reckless, fiery kind. This was different, calculated, controlled, dangerous. I had given everything for this company. I had sacrificed friendships, relationships, years of my life. And they thought I would just step aside. They had underestimated me. I was done proving myself. Now it was time to remind them exactly who they were dealing with. I barely slept that night. My mind kept replaying the moment, over and over. My father's voice, Adam's smirk, the quiet approval from distant relatives who had never stepped foot in the company, but suddenly had opinions about who should lead it. At 3 a.m., I was in my home office, staring at the contracts, the financial reports, the executive agreements I had personally negotiated. This wasn't just a business to me. I had spent 12 years fighting to keep it alive. I was the one who found investors when we were about to go bankrupt. I was the one who modernized operations, streamlined logistics, secured million-dollar deals that put us on the map. Adam, he had spent the last decade failing at every business venture he touched. Restaurants, tech startups, even a failed real estate project. Each time, he lost money, and my father wrote it off as experience. And now suddenly, he was qualified to take over? I exhaled slowly, pushing the rage down, turning it into something more useful. It didn't matter what my father thought, because he didn't have the power to make that decision. I clicked open a folder on my desktop. Executive Shareholder Agreement, signed 2015. I smiled. They thought I would walk away. By tomorrow morning, they would learn exactly how wrong they were. When I arrived at the office, something was different. The usual morning energy, the hum of productivity, the quiet conversations between employees, was replaced by something else. Hesitation. I saw it in the way people glanced at me, how they quickly looked away, whispering in hushed voices. News had spread. My father's announcement had already made its way through the company. I didn't react. I walked with the same confidence I had every other morning, my heels clicking against the polished marble floors. If they expected me to crumble, they were in for a disappointment. As I stepped into my office, my assistant hesitated. Your father and Adam are on their way up, she said carefully. I nodded. Good. I sat at my desk, exhaling slowly. I had exactly 15 minutes before they arrived, expecting me to accept my fate, 15 minutes before they learned the truth. The door swung open at 9 a.m. sharp. My father entered first, his usual air of authority filling the room. Adam followed, his expression smug, as if his name was already on the office door. I stayed seated. I let them speak first. You're aware of the transition? My father said, his tone almost dismissive. Adam will be taking over as CEO. We'll need your help ensuring a smooth handover. I tilted my head slightly. A handover? Adam smirked. Come on, don't make this harder than it has to be. I let the silence stretch. Let them think, just for a second, that I was accepting this. Then I leaned back, calm, unshaken. Oh, I'm not going to make this hard at all. I turned my screen toward them, the massive display lighting up with a document, the executive shareholder agreement. The clause was highlighted in bold. No CEO can be appointed without the approval of all majority shareholders. I folded my hands. And I, Dad, own 60% of the company. Silence. My father's expression darkened. Adam's smirk vanished. That's impossible, my father muttered. I shrugged. Not really. I clicked another file open. Remember when you needed extra funding in 2017? You signed over 15% of your shares to me. Then in 2019, when we were in legal trouble, another 10%, and of course my original 35%. I leaned forward. So no, Dad. You don't get to make this decision without me. Adam clenched his fists. You can't do this. I smiled. I already did. My father remained silent, calculating, trying to find a way out. I stood up, smoothing out my jacket. Adam, I'm not firing you, but you will work under me, or you can take the buyout and leave. Adam turned to my father, desperate, but for the first time, my father had no answer. Adam stormed out first. Good. My father lingered for a moment, staring at me, as if seeing me for the first time. I met his gaze, unwavering. He had spent years believing that bloodline mattered more than ability. He had underestimated me, and now he was paying for that mistake. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. My father's expression was unreadable, but I could see the storm brewing in his eyes. He wasn't used to being challenged, not by me. Adam, on the other hand, was unraveling fast. His confident smirk had crumbled into something else, panic. He flipped through the legal document on the screen, his fingers gripping the edge of my desk so tightly his knuckles turned white. This can't be real, he stammered, his voice shaking. Dad, she's bluffing. I leaned back in my chair, completely unbothered. I don't bluff, Adam. My father exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples as if this entire situation had given him an instant migraine. He was processing, calculating. Unlike Adam, who had spent his life coasting on our family's name, my father had built this company from the ground up. But he hadn't built it alone. I had been there, making the hard decisions, taking risks, bringing in the deals that saved us more times than I could count. And yet, when it came down to it, he still believed his son, his heir, should be the one to carry on the legacy. He finally looked up, his voice measured but strained. This is unnecessary, Evelyn. Unnecessary. As if I was throwing a tantrum over nothing. As if I hadn't spent 12 years keeping this company alive. As if I hadn't earned my place. I kept my expression neutral. What's unnecessary, Dad? The contract that you signed? The fact that I own 60% of this company? I folded my hands together. Or the fact that you thought you could make a decision without me? My father's jaw tightened, and Adam, still gripping the document, let out a bitter laugh. This is ridiculous. I mean, what, you're really going to fight us on this? Dad built this company. I turned my gaze to Adam, my patience razor thin, and I turned it into a multi-million-dollar empire. If I had let you run this business 5 years ago, we'd be bankrupt. His face turned red. That's not true. I arched an eyebrow. Really? Tell me, Adam, name one major deal you closed for this company. Just one. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Silence. I let it stretch between us, enjoying the way the confidence drained from his expression. Right, I said smoothly. That's what I thought. I turned back to my father. I'm not going anywhere. If Adam wants to work at my company, he can, but he's not in charge. Adam scoffed. Your company? Since when? I smiled. Since the moment you both underestimated me. I stood up, grabbing a folder from my desk and sliding it toward them. You have two options, I said, my tone businesslike. One, Adam can stay on in a non-executive advisory role. He won't be making any decisions, but he'll get to keep his salary. Or two, I'll buy him out at market value, and he can take the money and do whatever he wants. Adam's face twisted in fury. You can't just... I can. I cut him off, my voice sharp. And I will. You have until the end of the day to decide. My father's stare was ice cold. You're making a mistake. I met his gaze without flinching. No, Dad. You did, when you thought I'd just step aside. Adam turned to my father, eyes wide, desperate. But my father had nothing left to say. Because for the first time, he had lost. Adam stormed out first, slamming the door behind him. My father lingered for a moment longer, his eyes heavy with something I couldn't quite place. Regret? Frustration? Defeat? Maybe all of the above. Then, without another word, he turned and left. And just like that, the battle was over. For now. By the next morning, the whispers had already started. People moved differently around me, more hesitant, more careful. Some employees greeted me like always, but others weren't so sure where their loyalties should lie. I wasn't surprised. My father had spent decades building his name, earning the trust of our employees. His departure wouldn't just go unnoticed, it would be questioned, which meant I had to move fast. I called an emergency executive meeting for noon. As I walked into the boardroom, I could feel the tension crackling in the air. Half of the board members wouldn't even look at me. The other half studied me like I was a puzzle they couldn't quite solve. I took my seat at the head of the table. My seat. Let's get straight to it, I said, my voice steady. I know some of you have concerns. Silence. I tapped my fingers on the table. Let's clear this up now. Under my leadership, this company has grown by 300% in the last 5 years. We've expanded into 6 new markets. We've secured some of the largest contracts in this industry. I glanced at the CFO. Do we have any financial indicators suggesting the company is at risk? He hesitated, then shook his head. In fact, our projections show continued growth. I nodded. So let's be honest about what's happening here. I leaned forward slightly, my gaze sharp. This isn't about business. This is about the fact that my father and brother expected me to step aside, regardless of results. No one argued, because they knew I was right. I let the silence stretch, let them feel the weight of my words. Then, slowly, I leaned back. Now, I know some of you have received calls in the last 24 hours. Calls from my father, calls from Adam, maybe even offers. A few people shifted in their seats. I raised an eyebrow. If anyone here wants to disclose those conversations now, this is your chance. More silence. Then, finally, one of the senior executives cleared his throat. I received a call, he admitted, looking uncomfortable. From your father. And? He hesitated. Then, reluctantly, he said he was considering making an official appeal to the board, that changes in leadership should be reconsidered. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Did he offer anything in return? The executive hesitated again. Then, finally, he gave a slow nod. There it was. I exhaled slowly, standing up. My father built this company, I said, but I'm the one who took it to the next level, and I will not allow him to manipulate it from the outside. My voice dropped slightly, controlled, dangerous. If he wants a fight, I said, meeting every single person's gaze, he'll get one. I gathered my papers, smoothing them out. If anyone here believes my father and Adam should be in charge, now is the time to make your move. Silence. No one spoke. No one moved. Good. I turned and walked out, my head held high. This wasn't just about keeping my company. This was about making sure they never thought they could take it from me again. By the next morning, I could already feel the shift in the air. It wasn't just the whispers anymore. It wasn't just the hesitant glances from employees who weren't sure where to place their loyalty. It was something deeper, calculated, dangerous. My father and Adam were moving against me. I could see it in the way certain board members avoided my gaze, in the way some department heads, who had once been openly supportive, suddenly became neutral. They were planting seeds of doubt, calling old family friends, business associates, even investors. I knew my father well enough to predict his strategy. He wouldn't come at me directly, not yet. First, he would try to weaken my foundation, destroy my credibility, turn my own people against me. And Adam? He would be right beside him, playing the victim. I could already imagine him, sitting in some expensive restaurant, lowering his voice just enough to sound betrayed. I don't know what happened. She just took everything. I only wanted to continue our father's legacy. Pathetic, but effective. Because the moment doubt enters the boardroom, It spreads like a disease. By noon, I had received my first official challenge. A group of executives, ones who had been loyal to my father, requested a private meeting to discuss the future of the company, a carefully worded way of saying, "We don't trust you to lead." They wanted to see if I would bend, if I would waver. I didn't. At 3 p.m., I walked into the executive conference room. They were all waiting for me. 7 senior executives, some who had been with the company longer than I had been alive. They expected me to be defensive, to justify myself, to explain why I was fit to lead. Instead, I took my seat at the head of the table, placed my hands flat on the polished wood, and said, "Let's cut the bullshit. Who's been speaking to my father?" The air in the room shifted. A few of them tensed. Some exchanged glances. No one answered. I leaned back, calm, controlled. "I'm not here to beg for approval. I don't need to." My voice was steady, unwavering. "I built this company. I took it from a failing operation to a $75 million empire. The numbers don't lie." I turned to the CFO, Paul. "Tell me, is there any financial indicator suggesting I'm failing?" He hesitated. Then, reluctantly, he shook his head. "No." "In fact," I continued, my voice sharp, "our growth projections show another 20% increase next quarter, correct?" Paul cleared his throat. "Yes." I let my gaze sweep across the table. "So let's be clear about what's happening here," I said. "This isn't about business. This isn't about results. This is about my father and brother trying to take what isn't theirs." Silence. Then, finally, one of the executives shifted in his seat. "Evelyn, we don't want a family war to destabilize the company." I tilted my head slightly. "A family war." I let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "This isn't a war. This is a power struggle. And I promise you—" I folded my hands together, my voice dropping just enough to make them uneasy. "I don't lose power struggles." I saw it then, the way some of them swallowed, the flicker of doubt in their eyes. They weren't just questioning me anymore. They were afraid of what would happen if they bet against me, and lost. I stood up, smoothing my blazer. "If any of you want to back my father and brother, you're free to do so. But understand this." I picked up a printed financial report from the table and tossed it back down in front of them. "I hold the majority. I control the contracts. I control the capital. If you back the wrong side, there is no coming back." Then I turned and walked out. By morning, I had my answer. 3 of the executives who had sat in that meeting quietly requested individual meetings with me, their way of signaling that they had no intention of backing my father. But that wasn't enough, because I knew my father too well, and I knew he wasn't finished. The next day, his first counterattack arrived, a press release, crafted, polished, designed for damage. Harper & Company has always been a family-run business. We are saddened by recent developments, but remain committed to upholding the values that built this company. Changes in leadership are inevitable, and we hope to transition smoothly as we move forward. It was subtle, but I knew exactly what he was doing. He was painting himself as the reasonable one, the patriarch who only wanted what was best for the company, while I was the aggressive daughter, reckless in my takeover. And the worst part? It was working. Within hours, analysts on business news channels were already debating my leadership. Did Evelyn Harper move too aggressively? Will the company's internal war hurt investor confidence? Is she capable of maintaining stability? It didn't matter that I had grown the company. It didn't matter that I was the only reason we weren't bankrupt, because perception is power, and my father had just declared war on my reputation. But what he didn't realize, what he had never realized, was that I had been preparing for this moment for years. I didn't release a statement. I didn't hold a press conference. Instead, I picked up my phone and made a single call. To an investigative journalist I had known for years. "I have something for you," I said, "but you'll need to move fast." An hour later, I sent her everything: emails, internal documents, financial records, proof that under my father's leadership, Harper & Company had engaged in highly questionable business practices, ones that I had spent the last decade quietly cleaning up. The article hit within 24 hours. "Behind the scenes at Harper & Company, a legacy of hidden debts and cover-ups." It was brutal. It didn't just expose my father's poor management, it credited me for fixing it. It flipped the narrative overnight. My father wasn't the wise businessman guiding his children. He was the outdated relic who had mismanaged a company, and was bitter that his daughter had saved it. By the next morning, the damage was done. Investors weren't doubting me anymore. They were doubting him. And for the first time, my father had no way to fight back. 2 days passed before my father finally called me. I let the phone ring 3 times before answering, not because I needed time to think, but because I wanted him to. He had never been the type to admit defeat easily. For as long as I could remember, my father had been the kind of man who dictated outcomes rather than accepted them. He had always been the one in control, until now. Now he was calling me. I answered. "We need to talk," he said. His voice was calm, but there was something else beneath it, something I had never heard before. Resignation. I leaned back in my chair. "Do we?" A long pause. Then, finally, he let out a slow exhale. "You didn't have to do that." I knew exactly what he meant. The article, the financial records, the truth I had leaked to the press. I smiled slightly, even though he couldn't see me. "Neither did you." Another silence. But this time, it wasn't calculated. It wasn't the kind of silence my father used to manipulate people into filling the space. This time, it was different. This time, he had nothing to say. Finally, his voice came through, quieter than before. "This company was supposed to be a legacy, Evelyn?" I swallowed. Because once, a long time ago, I had believed that too. I had thought we were building something together, that everything I had done, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the battles I had fought to keep the company alive, was for our family. But now, I understood. The legacy had never been meant for me. It had always been for Adam. It had always been about his vision, his plan, not mine. And if I hadn't fought back, I would have been erased from the story entirely. "If you wanted me to protect the legacy, Dad, you should have trusted me with it." A long silence. Then, finally, he sighed. "What happens now?" I closed my eyes for a brief moment, because this was it. The moment where I could end it, where I could choose whether to crush him entirely or leave him with just enough dignity to walk away. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I let the weight of his questions settle over both of us. Then, finally, I spoke. "Now, I make sure you can never take it from me again." The war was over, but I didn't feel victorious. I had won. I knew that. My father had lost the trust of the board. Adam had taken the buyout and disappeared, and I had emerged as the undisputed leader of Harper and Company. And yet, as I sat alone in my office staring out at the city skyline, I felt empty. Because for 12 years, I had been fighting to prove myself. And now, there was no one left to fight. No phone calls from my father, questioning my decisions. No passive-aggressive emails from Adam, pretending he knew better. Just silence. For the first time in my career, I was truly alone. And maybe that was the real cost of winning. But if I had to choose between loneliness and being forgotten, I would choose loneliness every time. The next day, I walked into the office as if nothing had changed, except everyone knew the truth. There were no more whispers in the hallways, no more hesitant glances from employees. Because now, they understood. I wasn't just Evelyn Harper, the CEO. I was the woman who had outmaneuvered her father and brother, and come out on top. Some respected me for it. Some feared me for it. And some were still waiting for me to fail. I let them wait. At noon, my father and I met in the conference room for what would be our final conversation as business partners. He looked different. Not angry, not resentful, just tired. He sat down across from me, his fingers tapping lightly against the table. Finally, he spoke. "I'm retiring." I didn't react. I had expected this. "Effective immediately," he added. Still, I said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. He exhaled and looked down at his hands. "I'll sell my remaining shares. I'll keep a small percentage as an investor, but I won't be involved anymore." I studied him carefully. "And Adam?" I asked. His jaw tightened. Then, reluctantly, he admitted, "He's gone. Took the buyout. He won't be back." I had known it would end this way. Adam had never been strong enough to fight his own battles. The second he realized he couldn't win, he had done what he always did. Run. Still, hearing it out loud made something inside me ache. Not regret, not guilt, just finality. I nodded. Understood. My father was silent for a long moment. Then, finally, he spoke. "I underestimated you." It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest thing to one I would ever get. And strangely, I found that I didn't need it anymore. A month later, Harper and Company looked nothing like it had before. The old board members who had backed my father, gone. The executives who had questioned my leadership, replaced. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just fighting to prove myself, I was building something that no one could ever take from me again. Within 6 months, our profits soared. Within a year, we crossed the $100 million mark. And for the first time in my career, I wasn't just surviving, I was winning. A year after everything had happened, my father and I met for dinner. It was the first time we had spoken since his retirement. He looked older, quieter. There was no resentment between us anymore. No war left to fight, just acceptance. He picked up his drink and studied me carefully. I read about the latest deal you closed. I smirked slightly. It was a smart move. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I know. And in that moment, I realized something. I didn't need his approval. I didn't need him to tell me I had done the right thing, because I already knew. He lifted his glass to Harper and Company. This time, when I clinked my glass against his, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel resentment. I felt peace, because I had already won, and I no longer needed his approval to know it. As I sit in my office today, overlooking the city that I built my empire in, I think about the lessons this journey has taught me. That family can be your biggest enemy. That loyalty is a currency, not a guarantee. That power is never given. It's taken. But most importantly, that the best way to prove your worth is to stop seeking validation and build something so strong that they can never ignore you again. I have no regrets. Harper and Company is mine now, and I will make sure that no one ever forgets it.